You're listening to Seahawks Stories, taking you behind the scenes with your favorite Seahawks.
Setbacks behind Zorn, who's back to pass. Has time, looks for the left sideline, throws a bomb down there. He's got a man in front. He makes the grab. It's Raible at the 30, down to the 20. They'll never get him. He scores. Touchdown, Seahawks.
Powered by Seahawks.com.
And Zorn laid it in perfectly to Raible, who goes in to score on an 80-yard pass and run play.
Now, here's your host, the voice of the Seahawks, Steve Raible, and Seahawks legend Jim Zorn.
Oh, my goodness. Well, sorry, we were laughing as that was playing. First of all, because our guest today, Ray Roberts, former Seahawks offensive tackle, I don't know that he's ever heard that, and I think he finds it remarkable that we actually play.
I was watching him, and he was going, Steve Raible. And
and he looked at him.
He kind of looked.
Really?
They said, I guess they'll never catch him. I'm like, man, I guess Steve has some jets.
But Jim, during the commercial, then made me laugh. He said, what did you say? Like, it was a perfect pass.
Pete said, yeah, he laid it in there perfectly.
And you said, darn right I did. Yeah. Okay, so that's how we start this day on Seahawks Stories. And it dawns on me, as I have listened back to a few of our shows, Jim, that I don't do a very good job in kind of introducing everybody. I just sort of assume everybody knows everybody, and we just go. So in honor of that, as you all know, Jim Zorn, Ring of Honor member, first quarterback for the Seahawks, one of the record setters for this franchise for so many years. And our guest today, a young man, at least in relation to Jim and me.
I appreciate that.
That's okay. You won't be for long, but that's okay. Is Ray Roberts, offensive lineman, first-round draft choice, 92.
Yes.
92 for the Seahawks. Went on to play for the Lions as well and block for the incomparable Barry Sanders. All that we can talk about in just a bit. But we haven't had a kind of a conversation in a couple of weeks. Everything good for you? You were talking to Steve, our buddy Largent, the other day. Everything's good?
Yep. Steve just got back. He and Terry went off to Maui in Hawaii and had a big time there with some friends from Tulsa. I don't know why, but he and Terry love Tulsa. And I'm not saying that it's not a great place to live. It is, except it's harsh weather.
Oh, my goodness.
When I was talking to him, he said, Z-Man, the wind has been blowing 30 miles an hour plus for the last 3 days, and I'm supposed to get on my bike and go ride. And he said, you can't look forward to that. Plus, you can't even do it when the wind's blowing that hard.
Well, and it's in the middle of like Tornado Alley or
Right.
something. I mean, they have ferocious tornadoes come through that area, and depending on what you believe in this world today, but it's only going to get worse. So I wish him and Terry and all those folks back there. But
this is a great segue, actually, into Ray Roberts.
Yes.
Okay.
Because he is from
Explain.
Asheville, North
Yeah,
Carolina.
yeah,
Yes,
that's
I am.
right. Yeah.
And do you still have family there?
Yeah, so my whole family still lives
Oh,
there.
my goodness.
My three older sisters live there, all my aunts and uncles and things like that. So, it was quite a disaster there. Like, even now, they still don't have, like I just talked to my sisters yesterday, they don't have water that they can consume. So even if you boil it, they're still waiting for it to get filtered, all the bacteria and stuff that was in the water.
Can you go to stores and purchase things? Or?
It's starting to get that way. Where
Okay.
there's some stores that are that didn't get demolished, and there's other stores that have. So there's still like stations to get resources like toilet paper or bottled water or diapers or soap or like the most rudimentary things that you need for survive or to live. People still need those types of things.
Any, I almost hate to ask, but any losses as far as your family or your friends, close friends back there, in terms of loss of life, loss of homes, those sorts of things?
Some people lost homes. My sisters didn't lose any of their property, but things got damaged. But I just talked to my sister yesterday. It was a couple friends that were missing, and unfortunately they found them, deceased. You can tell that they just got swept up with all the water and stuff like that, and just probably. I don't want to put any blame on them, but probably should have gotten out a little sooner. But it was just really devastating, and just the simplest way to put it is that, like, there's this Mount Mitchell is like it's like about 6,000 foot elevation. Our reservoir is about 1,000 feet below that. Well, then that reservoir overflowed, and then so you have 30 inches of water traveling about 100 miles an hour down another 4,000 feet to the city. So it just wiped out everything in its path: roads, bridges, houses, buildings, cars. I mean, whatever it was, it just
Did they
totally wiped it
describe
out.
how quickly the water went up, or was it just a big wave that just came through?
It was like a constant flow of water for a couple days. And like Asheville is right in the middle of all the mountains, so usually when storms come, the mountains break it all up. You maybe get some rain and some high winds, but never, a hurricane down into the valley. And so it's like putting a hurricane in that water bottle. It had nowhere to go then, so it just destroyed everything. And the last time we've had an event like that in Asheville was like 1916 or something like that.
Yeah.
So none of the infrastructure was designed to handle that type of stuff. A lot of old roads and old towns back up in the mountains and things. Some of those places just got totally wiped off the map, like the roads, the buildings, the houses, everything. So it's going to be quite the rebuild.
Was there a large percentage of the families that you know about that couldn't go to work even, or couldn't, like, how do you sustain life? You just help.
Well, that's when Steve and I just did this presentation with Evergreen Health around hospice care and things. And so one of my topics there was like the power was showing up, and to me, like, yes, all of that was happening. People weren't working. The businesses weren't even there to go to work to. Then you didn't have power, you didn't have water, you didn't have all these different things to actually do the work. And so that's when, like, the humanity of people. Like, humanity transcends all the other stuff.
I love that.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when you can see that someone is in need and you can show up and help them, a lot of that is happening in Asheville. So there's a lot of residents that had resources, or they had new people that knew people that knew people. For a moment there, for the first maybe 3 or 4 days after all of this, every single road into Asheville was cut off. Either it had been wiped away or all the trees were down. So they had to actually helicopter stuff in. So I couldn't even get my sisters out of town until they got some of the roads cleared up so we can get them out. And so yeah, it took everything that you could possibly imagine that people needed and how people received supplies. Like, I mean, you had to use every resource available to do that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the update, and we're so happy. We're sorry for the folks who've lost lives and lost homes. Obviously, happy for your family that they're okay. And if anything, this should just give everybody who's listening to these conversations a couple of things. First of all, that there is help out there, and especially as Ray said, in the power of just showing up, the people around you, but also that these kinds of tragedies affect everybody.
Yeah.
They affect our families. They affect friends that may be well down the line. They affect professional football players and former players and all the rest. So lest we think that only certain people ever get hit with these things, no, they happen to everyone, and we should always be aware of that, being of use.
Yes.
As someone I talked about at our luncheon
Exactly.
that day talked to us one day about be of use. All right. So we've talked about those things. Now let's get back to a couple of football-related items, not the least of which is first-round draft choice, 1992, Ray Roberts, offensive tackle out of Virginia, All-American. When you came here, what were you coming into? What do you remember about that first year that you were here with the Seahawks?
Well, the first thing I remember is that growing up in North Carolina, the furthest west I'd ever been was Chicago. And the only time I had ever really flown on the plane, the first time I flew on the plane was at Virginia's, and we flew to Georgia like my first year or something. So I didn't have a whole lot of experience traveling really far on the airplane. It was like I was a little kid going, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Like it's like my agent and I, we actually flew the first direct flight Northwest Airlines had from D.C. to Seattle, and so it was long. It took forever.
Ray, coming all that way, during the draft, did you have any other inklings that you were going to be drafted by somebody else, or was it always Seattle?
Yeah, it was really interesting because that morning I woke up, the Indianapolis Colts had the first 2 picks, and so they were like, the first pick was going to be Steve Entman from University of Washington. He was clearly the best player in that draft going into the draft. And then they said, hey, with the second pick, if we go offense, we're going to select you. If we go defense, we're going to select Quentin Coryatt. So I was on the clock, just sitting on pins and needles, like, oh, man, like, I might be the second pick in the draft. Like, this is crazy. And obviously they picked Quentin Coryatt. And then after that, it was just like every team was just calling, trying to trade up to get me. And then the Cowboys called and it's like, hey, like we have this dude that we want to watch the draft with you. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, is it all right if he comes to your apartment? I'm like, yeah. So as soon as I hung the phone up, the dude knocked at the door. He was standing at the door, just waiting for them to say, like, yeah, it's okay to go in. And so he came in, and then the Cowboys had the 15th and I think the 17th pick. And after the third or fourth pick, they were trying to trade up with everybody to try to draft me. And then, but nobody would trade. And then the Seahawks called and was like, hey, we're thinking about take you at number 10, and they had like this contract structure they wanted me to kind of agree to, and my agent was like, nah, we don't want to do that. And then all I heard, they just said, okay, we'll talk to you later. And so then I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I messed that up. You know what I'm saying? like it's been kind of cool to be like one of the top 10 picks, you know what I'm saying? And then I heard, back in the day, it was, the production isn't like what it is now, but there's a guy that carries a card up to the commissioner, and they pronounce the name, and I heard him say Roberts. And everyone in the room was like, in our apartment was like having a good time, and I was just right next to the TV. I'm like, oh, I think he said Roberts. And so there's a picture of me I'm like this close to the TV.
Yeah, and there you are.
And I'm like, and when he said Ray Roberts, I'm like, everyone went nuts. But yeah, we was, I thought I had blown the opportunity to be like in the top 10 and come to Seattle. But, I was happy that I came here. Like I said, it's a long, long trip. When I landed, it was like, man, it's green and clean here. Like it was unbelievable. But yeah, I've enjoyed every minute of being here, even when I played in Detroit. And when I was in Detroit, Jay-Z was our offensive coordinator there for a year or two too. So it was coached by the guy over here, and but love Seattle and just have never thought about leaving.
I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but in '92 was Chuck still coaching, or was it?
No,
I thought it was Tom.
Tom.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
Tom. Then you played for
Dennis Erickson
Dennis
here,
as well.
and then I left and went to Detroit.
Yeah, I was here in '97. I went to training camp, and Rick Meyer was the quarterback. Dennis was still here. Howard Mudd. Howard Mudd was still here. So how many years did you get with Howard as a football offensive lineman?
By the way, one of the great offensive line coaches ever in the history of the game was right here in Seattle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
God rest his soul, Howard Mudd.
Yeah, so Hudson Houck was the offensive line coach when I was drafted here.
Okay.
My first year, and it was really interesting because he'd always show us film of the Dallas Cowboys offensive line. And he'd be like, "Oh, look how they do it! Look at," and so you're like, "Man, like we're tired of watching them. Like, coach us up." You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then it turns out he went to coach the Cowboys, and then Howard came here. And man, I'm telling you, like Howard Mudd, there's no coach I've ever had in my life on any level that had the impact on my career and on me as a person than Howard Mudd. Like for whatever reason, like it wasn't like a pretty engagement at first because he called me out on a lot of things and like really challenged me, like my work ethic and the things I was focusing on and all these. And I'm looking at this dude like, man, you don't even know me yet. Like, and you're like, coming at me like this. But it was something in the way he said it that I knew that this dude was looking out for what was best for me. And so I just bought into everything that he told me and taught me.
He was about being practical.
Yeah.
You could block guys with your butt.
Oh,
you could, give him the flipper.
Well, on the backside of plays, like when you're trying to cut someone off, like we would actually practice posting up, like when you post up on basketball court.
You just
so
work
you get
around the
inside
guy.
motion and you just box out and post a dude up and running back comes right through, and so guys don't do that as much anymore. But man, you got your big 6'6", 300-pound frame, walling someone off. Hey, there's a lane to run through.
What are a couple of that would be one of them. But he had a really very different philosophy on pass protection, on how, especially at that position right there. And he would say, most offensive line coaches want to build a cup around so that the quarterback can be there. But he never wanted to build a cup. Howard always wanted to build a dish. And so he would. How different was that? Think about Virginia, and then coming here. It must have been just totally.
When I came into the league, a lot of people compared like my athleticism and footwork to like Jackie Slater. And so Jackie Slater had this really quick, like kick straight back kind of set. And so that's how Hudson taught me, was a kick straight back. Well, the problem with that is, I'm 6'6", long legs. After about 3 kicks, I start to get tall. It's hard to stay low. So dudes would just bull rush me a lot. So I had to figure out how to defend the bull rush. And then so then Howard came. Howard was like, why do you just kick straight back all the time? Like you said. And I was just like, that's what I've been taught. Like, what else is there to do?
Right.
And he's like, well, you have long arms, quick feet. Like, I want you to attack. I want you to be more aggressive and pass blocking. So I want you to, like, he would call it short setting. And so his signal for me was like pulling the chain on a chainsaw, like, you know, like he's like, hey, pull the chain. So he wants me to short, and it was scary because you're blocking Derek Thomas, and I'm just like, boy, if I miss though, he has like a 10-yard run right at the quarterback, you know. So you had to get really used to like being uncomfortable trailing the defender and blocking the back of his shoulder. So he would go like, Ray, like just short set him and then like stay inside and then block the back of his shoulder. I'm like, man, that doesn't even sound right. Like, I'm behind Derek Thomas, blocking the back of his shoulder. Like, what are you talking about, you know? And we would just go, he and I would be out on the practice field together, just going through play after play after play, footwork after footwork after footwork, and he was challenging me, be more aggressive, be more aggressive, be more aggressive, meet him sooner. Like Jay-Z was saying, like he wanted to be a flatter line than more of a, than a cup like this. And so, but once I got comfortable doing it, man, it just changed my whole success rate in pass blocking, and then that kind of became like my calling card in the league. So other offensive linemen would be like, man, like the way you would go after people, or the quickness of your feet, like all this other kind of stuff, and all that was due to Howard, you know. Yeah. And then off the field, Howard had a stepson, Adam, and Adam, young 15-year-old kid, like getting into trouble and stuff around Kirkland and all this other kind of stuff. And so Howard would call me and go like, hey, man, like, we can't find Adam. I'm like, all right, I'll go find him. And so I'd go down through Kirkland and go to all the little arcades and stuff, and I'd find him, take him home, and or I'd take him to get something to eat and talk to him and all this other kind of stuff, and try to get him going and get him going in the right direction. And it got to the point where when a lot of the young kids would see me walking in Kirkland, they'd be like, oh, yeah, Adam's over there. We know who you're here to get, So Howard and I just connected on such a different level than just football, that there's not another coach on the face of the earth that has just had the impact on me. Even before I retired in Detroit, he was coaching at Indianapolis. I called him at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, hey, Howard, this is what I'm feeling. What do you think? And he goes, well, you've already answered it. You called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I'm like, yep. So that morning, like 5 hours later, I retired from the NFL.
Wow. Yeah.
And then a year later, the Saints called and said, hey, like, want you to come in, and like, we need someone to help with the younger players. We need a veteran player. So I called Howard, like, hey, man, like, this is what – he goes, like, remember that call you gave me at 3 o'clock in the morning? I go, yeah. He goes, your body's going to feel like that again. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I should probably stay retired. So Howard has had such a tremendous impact in my life that I just love the dude.
We could sit here and tell stories all day just about Howard, and there are coaches like that, and there are those kinds of mentors in, I think, all of our lives somewhere along the way. We're going to talk about that with you here in just a second. But before we leave the topic of football, you had a chance. You could have stayed here in Seattle, right? But you also had an opportunity to go to Detroit.
Right.
How did that happen? And then once you got there and you saw and firsthand who and what Barry Sanders really was, that must have been just terrific for an offensive lineman.
Well, the hard thing is that I always wanted to play. I never wanted to leave Seattle. And then I think back then they had the franchise tag and the transitional tag, and I was like the tag that said transitional player. And because I was coming off an injury, they removed the transitional tag, and so that made me a free agent, knowing that they didn't have to match offers and all that kind of stuff. And then it was in the middle of Ken Barron trying to move the team to Anaheim, like it was that same offseason. So it's like there's little messages that you get when you go like, yeah, maybe I may not be in the plans. It's because I was the last to learn that they were trying to move the team to Anaheim. And so then I'm like, yeah, like maybe my time here may be done. But the interesting thing is that when I went to visit Detroit, it was like UVA Midwest. There was already like 5 or 6 UVA players on the team, and one of them was Herman Moore, who he and I were freshmen together, first-year players together at Virginia, and he left a year early. He was a 10th pick in the draft, and the next year I was a 10th pick in the draft. And so talking to him, and, obviously seeing Barry, but not really knowing Barry, and I was talking to Herman. He's like, dude, we're like so close to like being like a championship team. Got all these guys on off. We had Brett Perriman, Johnny Morton,
Who was the fullback?
The fullback, Corey Schlesinger.
Corey Schlesinger, he had no neck. I mean,
No neck at all.
His muscle went from his ears,
back of his ears,
all the way to the end of his shoulders.
From Nebraska.
I would say I asked Schlesinger one question. I said, "So, what do you think about when you go to block a linebacker?" Because he would just pound people. He was really a good blocker, and he said, "Here's my philosophy: the closer I get, the faster I go." That was his sentence.
He was notorious for changing out face masks in games because he would break them, bend them, all kind of stuff. But he would get fined a lot in today's game because he was leading with his big head all the time.
Yeah.
But one of the strangest things or funniest things about being in Detroit was my first year. I tried to pride myself on smart dude from Virginia. We're arrogant a little bit about that.
Sure.
And so I'm looking at the plays, and there's like a linebacker with a exclamation point over him, and I kept going like, man, I've never seen that. Like, what does that mean? And so I'm trying to sort through the playbook. So finally I go, hey, coach, what does this mean? He goes, oh, that's Barry's guy. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, one guy's not going to tackle Barry, so we don't have to block him. And I would just be like, what?
Wow.
Like who is this dude? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so it would always be like a backside linebacker or something where we just go we just work this double team on the backside. We're not even going to worry about that.
Don't
that
come
dude.
off the double team.
Just stay on the double team because Barry's going to make one guy miss every time.
Frank Falk was the running back coach, and I said, so why is Barry the way he is? He said, I've never been around a guy that could see the line of scrimmage and you can see that linebacker coming. He said, but Barry can see the safety.
Yeah.
So he said he's kind of he's got like a 3-level vision where a guy can run through the line of scrimmage and you can avoid a linebacker, but Barry could go through the line of scrimmage. He already would deal with the linebacker as he's going through the line of scrimmage, but he was always looking at the next guy down the field, and he could see where he was. And I thought that was an amazing statement by the running back coach on what Barry.
Yeah, Barry was incredible, man. And I think the year that he rushed for 2,000 yards. It was when Coach Ross had came. Wayne Fonts had left, and Coach Ross came.
And I was there.
You were there.
I was there.
Former Georgia Tech, by the way, Bobby Ross.
Yeah, that's right. And he had beat us at Virginia, so I was I used to give him a hard time about that.
Thank you.
But I hated that. That's why sometimes
one of my favorite days ever.
No, that's why I try not to say Georgia Tech a lot. It's like that other school in Virginia. I try not to say.
If you had been at the University of Georgia, I would be even happier, more thrilled. But
but anyway, I remember I forget the offensive the quarterback coach maybe.
Me.
No, who was the coordinator then? Tom
Sylvester Kroom.
Oh, was it Kroom? Anyway, they called us we had this meeting, and it was some offensive linemen, some running backs, quarterbacks. Like, hey, what do we need to do? And after 2 games, we only had 53 yards rushing with Barry. And I just said, man, this is the best running back in the league, in the world maybe. Let's just give him the ball until his shoes fall off. We should have a big, huge oxygen tank on the sideline, and he should be exhausted after every game. And then from that point on, we rushed for exactly 2,000 yards in 14 games. And so we ended with 2,053 yards. And so it was pretty amazing because we had offense, tons of offense. I think Herman Moore was getting 115, 120 receptions a year. Brett Perriman probably had close to 80, 90 catches. Johnny Morton had another 50 or 60 catches. We had an amazing, and then we had Dave Sloan at tight end, who was a pretty good tight end. We, in our offensive line, because of the way Barry ran, we never got the credit that we deserved. But if you watch, obviously Barry's going to have his highlight plays. But if you watch the games, we were delivering him to the second level, which is what we're supposed to do. And then Barry does his thing after that. Right. And there was a lot of that going on. And so you don't rush for 2,053 yards at Barry just outrunning everybody. Right. And so it was pretty incredible. Unfortunately, we didn't advance far in the playoffs. We had some a young secondary. I think we led the league in pass interference calls that year, but we couldn't seem to get out of our own way that way. But it was amazing being able to play in such a powerful offense and then be able to block for somebody like Barry.
Did it surprise you when he retired so suddenly?
Yeah, it did. So Barry and I were always the team captains, and then we always roomed together in training camp. And so when he didn't come in, everybody was like I was getting peppered with questions like every day. Like, did he show up? Why didn't he show up? Have you talked to him? All this other kind of stuff. And I talked to him one time because at the time, if he had come back and played, and by Thanksgiving, he would have had the all-time record for rushing because we normally had about 1,100 yards around that time, and that was I think what he needed to get to the record. And I was the only lineman left that had blocked for him when he rushed for 2,000 yards. So selfishly, I was saying, like, come on back, man. Like, get to Thanksgiving, and then you can leave because then I could be the only dude that blocked for a 2,000-yard rusher and the all-time leading rusher. But it just wasn't happening. It was really, really strange. You know, like, Barry is a type of dude, though, that's like, once he, like, decides he's going to do something, he's committed to that. Yeah. He's convicted by it. It's kind of hard to change his mind. I do think that part of the retirement, even in his documentary thing, he didn't really speak to the retirement. But I think part of it was that the organization, like, we would get players in to fill spots, and then as they started to learn our system and then it was time for them to get paid, let's switch them out. So it was like we're on this treadmill. Right. The team just wasn't getting better. We weren't getting good enough to get past the first round of the playoffs. And I think that just kind of frustrated Barry. And he's never going to be one of the dudes that's going to go and say, like, hey, I want to do this. I want to make the calls. You know, he's never going to pull that stunt with people. He just goes like, well, I guess this is it for me. And I don't know.
Well, if you would ask me that question, it's so funny to listen to a player who, you know, he was a teammate and his roommate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And for me, Barry came in 2 days before training camp started, and he told Bobby Ross, his words were, I always wanted to play in the National Football League for 10 years, and last year was my 10th year. I'm done.
2 days before camp.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was really upsetting. You know, you were saying you were surprised. Well, we were all surprised because I think our draft that offseason would have been totally different knowing that Barry was going to retire, but we had the expectation that Barry was going to be there. Yeah. And Barry only knows, hey, in his mind, he was done. And I don't know when he came to that conclusion because I've been a player too. You know, you just kind of run through and you got to work out a lot of different things. But he quit 2 days. So we were left without a star running back. Right. Yeah. And, you know, one thing led to another. We got another guy, as you well know, from
James
the Rams.
Stewart.
No, the small guy from he was just like Barry, only not as built.
Ronnie Rivers?
I'll have to go look. He was from the Rams, and he played either at UCLA or FC or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, he was not quite living up to that.
Well, there are very few.
There's no way. I'll never forget Barry. When I had gone there, he would never say a word at practice.
No.
He said nothing. And he would always run sprints by himself in the heat of the day right after practice. Yep. He would run like 10 hundreds or 10 110s. Nobody else would be on the field, and he would run. I watched him. I watched all 10 one day. Yeah. And he just ran them as hard as he could. He never there was no striding. He just took off and ran as hard as he could. I don't know what was going on in his mind, but
the first time I had an inkling that something was going on, our last game was Baltimore the year before, and it took him a long time to get to the bus. Everyone's on the bus. So we're waiting for Barry. So they're like, Ray, can you go see what's going on? And so I go in, and Barry hadn't even taken a shower yet. He was still sitting in his locker in his uniform. I'm like, hey, man, I don't know what's going on, but we need to get on this bus and get up out of here. And so he, you know, obviously got on the bus, but he was so quiet and never really talked to people. But the people that he was close to that he talked to a lot was Lomas Brown and Kevin Glover. Mm-hmm. And those were his two dudes. Yeah. And so he's, you know, Kevin, having talked to Kevin and Kevin having conversations with him, I think it may have been a combination of the 10-year thing, but definitely the direction of that the league was going. He wanted to be on the championship team. He wanted to get to the Super Bowl. He wanted to play in the Super Bowl, that kind of stuff. You know, and there was always these rumors that his dad's favorite player was Jim Brown, and so you don't want to break the Jim Brown records and all this other kind of stuff, which his dad's a totally different story. But you know, I do think that, you know, maybe the 10-year thing has a part to do with it, but the other part too was that he had seen his dudes be shuffled in and out, and just that cycle of doing that and not really building the team.
He was one player, and he can attest to this, where every single person on the Detroit Lions sideline, they were up as far as you could get up to the field when Barry was on the field, because he could go all the way.
Yeah.
Let me just hand him the ball,
Yep.
and he'd go all the way. So but then you look across the field, and every opponent, coach and player, whether you on defense or offense, you were on the edge of the sideline because Barry was going to possibly get the ball, and you wanted to see that run. It was unbelievable.
A remarkable talent. I want to get to a couple of other things before we go. But one of the things, and you reminded me of it when you talked about leaving to go to Detroit. And I look back, and since this is, Seahawks stories and it's about the history of this franchise, I look back at those kinds of decisions, not so much the decision by the player, but what they envisioned was going to happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at it from our time, in our early years, and we had a guy named Nick Bebout, who was one of our offensive tackles. Nick was never going to be a Pro Bowler or anything, but he was such a solid player and such a leader up there. And they cut him to let a younger guy play who was not ready to play. And so I thought that was a kind of a turning point as we had just started to ascend as a team. Roll ahead a few years, Steve Hutchinson walks away, goes to Minnesota, ends up being in the Hall of Fame. He had to.
Well,
and then guys like
because of the transition tag.
Yeah.
Well, the thing on our line that we had here that we're building, that Howard was building, there was me, Jeff Blackshear, Kevin Mawai, and Andy Heck. And all of us ended up leaving.
Yeah.
And so, Kevin ended up going to the Hall of Fame. Jeff Blackshear won the Super Bowl as playing beside Jonathan Ogden in Baltimore. Andy ended up going to Chicago and playing, and now he's like the offensive line coach at Kansas City. Yep. And then I ended up going to Detroit and blocking for the all-time league. All of us were on the same offensive line at one point. And then the Seahawks.
It shows you that the Hawks were getting the right guys.
Yes.
And the building, how long do you stay? I mean, that's that's the
eternal question.
The question, right?
Yeah.
Gosh, did we get rid of him too soon? Or
was there a salary cap in those days?
Oh yeah.
Was there? Okay.
Yeah.
So you always had to keep that in the back of your mind, just as they do now. But we didn't have that issue, obviously, when you and I started. But then you couldn't go anyplace anyway.
Right.
Nobody could offer you free agent money because there was no such thing as a free agent. Okay.
But
so
you played for some great coaches. You really have, and it's a testament to you because those coaches knew what to do with your talent.
Yeah.
I mean, they helped you with some technique, some fundamentals. Now you went out there and battled, but you can see it today too, right?
Yeah.
You're not coaching per se,
Right.
although you tried to coach.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Well, I coached high school football for about 7 years, and I don't know, my approach to sports and stuff like that wasn't necessarily the wins and losses of games. I was trying to win men's souls and hearts and make them good citizens of the community, good brothers, good husbands, good partners, good students, good community people. That's where my focus was. And so I felt good about how I impacted young guys in this area in that regard. I did a coaching internship with the Colts after I retired, and because Howard was there and he had just had a surgery, and he was like, hey, I want you to come and work with the young guys, and I'll take the top 7 dudes, and then this is how we're going to roll. So I did that one off season, and then I decided I don't know if I'm built for this grind.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's a long hours.
And then this one coach came to me and said, hey, man, I've lived in 13 different houses. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not built for that. No. I promise you. And so I kind of got away from the professional coaching spot.
We had a coach named Andy McDonald who was our running backs coach and special teams. He did both in our first few years. And he always used to say, he said, kid, don't get wall-to-wall carpeting, and if you do, don't nail it down, because that's what the business of being a coach or even a player at times.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you go from – I love Andy, God bless him. Left us far too soon. So you go from that opportunity to coach, and you kind of find your way into this area now where you're literally travel the country working with and for Special Olympics and Special Olympics athletes and the organization and the communities that they're in. Plus, you speak so much and mentoring and all those things. Where did all that come from, right?
Well, sometimes there's no self-made people. Even though people want to say, like, hey, man, I'm a self-made millionaire, I'm a self-made. Along the way, people encouraged, supported, gave you extra advice, like all that kind of stuff. And so I just feel like you have to have a team of people, and I like to be on people's team. Whether I'm getting you from A to B or B to C or whatever it is, I want to help you get to the place that you're trying to get to. And so that's just kind of how I've always been. And so when I left, I went back to school at the University of Washington, got a master's degree in athletic administration. And during that, I took a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion classes. And then this opportunity came up at Microsoft to work in that area in their gaming division. So I went and worked at Microsoft as a diversity specialist for 3 years. And then as I was doing that, the Special Olympics USA Games came to Seattle, and we needed ambassadors. So they had a couple dudes that was trying to talk about like inclusion and stuff. And so I went to the leadership one day, and I'm like, hey, like the next time, can I get up and talk about what inclusion is and what it's not? And I did. And so some of the Special Olympics folks were there like, hey, man, like we're trying to get our school-based programs into the inner city, and we're having a hard time. And we think you can be the dude to help us. And so that's kind of how I got into Special Olympics. And so I was the director of urban development for Special Olympics. Now I'm the senior advisor for urban development for Special Olympics North America. So I travel to all the different inner city schools and communities and neighborhoods all over the United States, trying to help their school districts strategize on how to implement our school-based programs. There's a lot going on and a lot of things you have to overcome and nuances and all that kind of stuff, stigmas you have to overcome. And so I try to help break down that stuff and then help them strategize on how to get our stuff into the schools. And then as it relates to the mental health piece, since I retired, I struggled with depression a lot. And so I would just sleep on the couch, turn off all the lights, cover up all the windows, all that kind of stuff. And then and I would just battle with it all the time. And then right before the pandemic, I started having the panic attacks. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I couldn't get out the door. I could go see my kids. I couldn't get out to go hang out with my buddies. NASA hears me tell the story all the time. Like I'd always go like, hey, NASA, I'm running late. But I was running late, not because I got up late. It's just like I had to talk myself out the door, down the steps, into my car, get to the red light, get to the stop sign. Like I talked my way all the way over to the studio.
And nobody knew.
Nobody knew I was doing this. And so then finally one day I felt like I was about to throw everything in my house out the window. I just didn't know what to do. And so I called my ex-wife, Beth. We were trying to figure out places to get into. We're struggling with that. She called Sandy Gregory. And then Sandy and Beth put together this plan to get me to this program called After the Impact that the NFL sponsors in Manchester, Michigan. And so then I went there for 30 days. You suppose it's a requirement to stay for 2 weeks, but I was like, I need longer than that. like it's not going to work if I'm just here for 2 weeks. So I ended up staying there for 30 days. And so when I came out of that, I came to NASA. I was like, hey man, like I want to tell my story, because I think when I got to this home where there were 6 former players, dudes were suffering in silence, man. Like one dude came there after his wife found him writing apology letters because he was about to commit suicide. And so I'm like, man, like you can't allow people to live like that in isolation. And so that's why I started the podcast, to tell my story, to debunk it, to make it something that people are comfortable talking about and sharing and reaching out for help. And so we got the Mindful Therapy group that came on board as a title sponsor. And so, it's been, to me, it's healing to be able to do it and to be able to talk about it. And it's also, it makes you feel good when you're out in public and people are saying, hey, I listened to it. I went and got help. A guy at the game the other day came and said, man, I had been thinking about being a therapist for a long time. I listened to your podcast for a little while, and then I just went and signed up to take classes to be a therapist, like that kind of. So that type of impact is what I'm trying to go for.
All that was before COVID hit. That was 2019.
Yeah.
And then you went through COVID.
Yeah.
And
COVID made it worse.
I was going to ask you how
everything. Because you even more isolation. Yeah. And to the point where I would tell my kids, like, I don't know who you guys hanging out with, so you can't come over here. I'm a diabetic too, so that was a part of it too. I just didn't want to catch COVID in that situation. But then the isolation part just made it even worse.
Did they help you with your identity, like who you are as a man, or how did you? It wasn't
necessarily. It wasn't necessarily like who I was as a man. It was more of the messages I was telling myself, my self-talk. Like I had been through a divorce and all this other kind of stuff, and you feel bad about that, and the issues that you create for your kids and your ex-wife and all this other kind of stuff. And so I felt guilty about that a lot, and so I couldn't see the value in what I was bringing to the world because I had just labeled myself as that guy. And then you start to kind of I've always wanted to be the world's greatest dad and the world's greatest husband, and I failed at one of them. And then I got scared. Like I was afraid to try anything because I'm like, hey, go walk up the stairs. Like, I don't know. I might not make it. I might slip on the third stair. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Wow,
So you just talk yourself out of a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so they're in therapy world, they're called cognitive distortions. And so I was then got the tools to go to challenge those, be curious about it, you know. And then as you start to answer those things and speak truth and fact to it, then all that stuff calms down, and then you're able to move. So it wasn't a thing about identity or manhood or anything. It was more of just the self-talk, you know, and we talk to ourselves more than we talk to anyone else.
Yeah.
Well, it's an amazing story, and it's a story that I'm sure a lot of your teammates, a lot of us, didn't know quite the detail and the depth of what you had to fight through and where you are today. Two things before we wrap up. First of all, you mentioned Sandy Gregory. We're going to have her on this show here one of these days, NASA. We're going to have her on the show one of these days. She was, she's a 50-year just like we are. She was there from the very first day of the Seahawks. She worked in the PR department. More importantly, then she moved into kind of community relations. And then after the fact, she's working with helping players find resources, everything from health to financial to educational. She's just an amazing person. She gives so much of her time. And I think all of us can say that we have benefited from knowing Sandy and from all the help that she's been. That's the first thing. Second thing, if people want more of your information, of your story, of your advice, where can they find that?
Well, my podcast is called Big Ray's Garage Grind, and you can find that on Seattle, the Seahawks.com website, on YouTube.com/Seahawks, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any of the podcast platforms. You can find that. We just dropped our latest episode yesterday, I think it was. And
is it in your garage?
Well, it's a long story. Like, so during the pandemic, my son was playing football. And none of the gyms were open, so we had to work out in the garage. And so in order to show his coaches that we were working out, we would post on social media our garage grind. And so they would see him working out. And then my followers just kind of jumped on the whole garage grind thing, and I just kind of stuck with it.
Good for
so
you.
We call it the Big Race Garage Grind Mental Health Edition. It's kind of like the long title of it. But yeah, so you can find me there. And then I'm always on Twitter at Big Ray Roberts. And I can argue and debate with people about some of the most mundane things, but that's usually when I'm bored. So if you see me arguing a lot, it's like, oh, Ray doesn't have anything to do today.
That's good.
But yeah, you can find me on those places. I try to be active, and obviously on the broadcast team on our pregame, postgame shows.
Well, all I can say is Ray Roberts is you are a remarkable human being. You were a great football player that Jabe and I'd still be playing if you were in front of him and giving him a little protection.
You'd be my backside guy.
That's right. While he threw to Largent and let me clear out down the middle. But that's another story. We want to thank you for A, coming on here and telling your story, B, for bringing all the great stories, and the great Seahawks player that you were all those years. And in the meantime, we will be back with another Seahawks stories coming up in the next few weeks as we continue on. Mr. Zorn and I, Ray, again, thank you. And we will be in touch with you folks again. Thanks for joining us.
Go Hawks.